When the Taliban punished women in public, they didn't just enforce rules, they staged fear. They turned streets and stadiums into classrooms, where the lesson was always the same: obedience or pain. And that lesson marked an entire generation of Afghan women. Even now, decades later, the memory still hangs over the country like smoke that never fully clears. To understand how the terror became normal, you have to remember what Afghanistan looked like before it. Because in the 1970s, Afghanistan had problems, plenty of them. But daily life in the cities still offered women something that would later be taken away: options. In Kabul, Herat, and Mazar-e-Sharif, women studied at universities, worked in offices, and moved through public spaces without the constant fear of being stopped, questioned, or dragged away. Kabul University, in the mid-1970s, had thousands of female students, especially in medicine, literature, and law. Hospitals depended on female nurses and doctors, partly because many patients felt more comfortable being treated by women. In banks and offices, it wasn't unusual to see women behind desks, handling paperwork, meeting clients, building careers. Girls walked to school with books in their arms. Some wore headscarves, some didn't. Families spent weekends in gardens and by lakes. Radio played music, cinemas showed films, bookstores stocked novels from across the region. Even with conservative traditions in many areas, the cities carried a light, hopeful energy. For women, there was space to grow, space to dream. Then the ground shifted. In 1979, the Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, and the calm life that still existed in the cities began to crack apart. War doesn't just destroy buildings, it destroys routines, safety, the future. Rockets hit neighborhoods that once felt ordinary. Roads turned dangerous. Homes turned into rubble. Millions fled across borders into Pakistan and Iran, leaving behind whatever they couldn't carry. Over the decade that followed, around 1 million Afghans died, and the country was damaged in ways that would take generations to repair. During the war, local militias multiplied. Each had its own leader, its own rules. Some tried to protect communities. Others became predators, stealing, extorting, kidnapping, abusing power. When the Soviets withdrew in 1989, people hoped peace would finally arrive. Instead, Afghanistan slid into another nightmare. Militias turned their weapons on each other. Between 1992 and 1994, Kabul became a city under daily threat. Rockets landed on markets, on buses, on homes. Families lived in constant tension, never sure which morning would end in fire. Women still tried to continue life, work when possible, care for families, hold on to education. But freedom was shrinking, street by street, month by month. By the mid-1990s, Afghanistan was exhausted. People wanted peace, order, someone, anyone, who could stop the warlords from tearing the country apart. And in that chaos, a new force appeared with a promise that sounded like a rescue. They said they would end corruption, stop kidnappings, disarm criminals, bring justice. They called themselves the Taliban. They first emerged in 1994 near Kandahar. Their leader, Mullah Muhammad Omar, was a former fighter who had lost an eye in the Soviet war. Many early Taliban members were young men shaped by refugee camps and religious schools, places where education was often narrowed down to religious texts and strict discipline. They were organized, severe, and completely convinced that their version of law should govern Afghanistan. In parts of southern Afghanistan, people were desperate enough to believe them. The Taliban punished local criminals publicly in 1994, and many villagers saw it as proof. These men can restore order. Support spread fast. Within a year, the Taliban controlled major parts of Kandahar province. Then they pushed outward, north and east, capturing Ghazni, Zabul, and parts of Helmand. Many warlord forces were unpopular or exhausted. Some surrendered, others collapsed. As the Taliban advanced, they shut down local courts and replaced them with their own judges. By mid-1996, they held large areas across the south and west. Then came the moment that changed everything. September 1996. After 2 days of fighting, the Taliban entered Kabul. Government leaders fled, and the Taliban declared the Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Life changed immediately. Women heard the first orders like a closing door. No more office work, no more teaching, no more school. Girls' schools were shut within weeks. Dress codes became strict. Leaving home without a male guardian became dangerous. Music vanished. Movies vanished. Public entertainment disappeared almost overnight. At first, some people tried to believe the rules might soften, that this was temporary, that the Taliban would settle, then loosen. But the Taliban weren't building a temporary system. They were building a machinery of control. And the quickest fuel for control is fear. Once the Taliban organized their enforcement, they made a choice that would shape the entire era. Punishment would be public, not hidden, not private, public. Because public punishment doesn't just target one person. It targets everyone watching. It turns fear into a social atmosphere. In Kabul, one of the first major locations used was Ghazi Stadium, once a place for football matches, cheering crowds, and weekend gatherings. Now it became a theater of intimidation. Later, the larger Kabul Sports Stadium was used as well. These places were chosen for a reason. They could hold thousands. And the Taliban wanted thousands to witness what disobedience looked like. Women were brought in after being accused of different violations. One woman was taken for walking outside without a male guardian. Another for reasons as small and humiliating as her shoes were too loud. A teacher who tried to return to her classroom, hoping to continue the work she had trained for, was punished for attempting to teach. Different accusations. Same message. Under this system, women did not have independent rights to move, to work, to exist publicly. Taliban enforcers carried sticks, cables, and whips. The number of lashes varied, sometimes 10, sometimes 30, sometimes more. And what made it even worse was how routine it became. People in Kabul had never seen violence displayed like this in open civic spaces, especially directed at women for everyday behavior. The effect spread quickly. Women who once walked to work with confidence began staying home for days. Families stopped letting daughters leave the house, except when absolutely necessary. Hospitals struggled as female staff were removed. School doors stayed locked. And the Taliban saw the result. Public fear made the city easier to control, so they pushed harder. By 1997, Taliban authority covered most of Afghanistan. As city after city fell, Herat, Farah, Nimruz, Uruzgan, Helmand, the Taliban installed commanders who enforced rules with different levels of severity. That meant punishments could vary by region, but fear felt the same everywhere. Herat became notorious for harsh enforcement. Taliban officials there imposed severe restrictions, and even hospitals, already fragile after years of war, were further damaged when nurses and medical workers were beaten for working without permission. In Kabul, accusation after accusation turned into a grim weekly cycle. Some women were accused of wearing socks that were too thin, others of walking too boldly. Many sought medical help in secret at night. Doctors treated bruises, cuts, and broken bones while knowing they could face punishment themselves if caught helping without official approval. To enforce control, the Taliban relied heavily on a dedicated policing apparatus, the Department for the Promotion of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice. Its officers patrolled markets and street corners, sticks tucked under their arms. They stopped women, questioned them, inspected clothing, decided, on the spot, what was acceptable. Fear became so deep that even windows felt dangerous. Families hung heavy curtains. Daughters stayed away from sunlight. Public life narrowed to almost nothing. In 1998, the Taliban pushed into the north, toward Mazar-e-Sharif, a major city and regional hub. The battle lasted days. When the Taliban captured the city in August, the aftermath was devastating. Civilians died in the chaos. And once control was established, the restrictions came fast. Women who worked as professors at Balkh University, lawyers in local courts, employees in government offices, many were removed the same week. Girls' schools closed overnight, cutting off education for thousands. Taliban forces carried out house searches, and during raids, women caught outside, even steps from their own door, could be punished. Public spaces like Chahar Su and areas near the Blue Mosque became places where punishment was carried out regularly. People returned from markets shaken because witnessing violence became part of daily commerce. Meanwhile, in Kabul, stadium punishments grew larger. Crowds sometimes reached thousands. And attendance was not optional. It was expected. To refuse was to invite suspicion. One case involved a young woman brought to the stadium after being accused of adultery. Her punishment was so severe that even some Taliban supporters later admitted, privately, that the scene disturbed them. But discomfort didn't change policy. The system stayed. In Herat, accusations took different forms. Some women were punished for sewing clothing the Taliban deemed unacceptable. Others were caught in secret study groups, attempting to keep education alive in hidden rooms. Their punishments were harsh and often public, because again, the goal was not only pain, it was warning. By 1999, the Taliban controlled almost the entire country, with only a few northern areas remaining outside their grip. And as they gained territory, enforcement tightened. They no longer leaned on warnings or community pressure. They enforced rules with speed and certainty. Jalalabad became another center of strict control. Commanders demanded specific forms of covering. Any perceived improper clothing could lead to immediate punishment. The promotion of virtue ministry became more aggressive. Officers didn't only stand at markets, they began entering homes without notice, searching for what they believed violated rules. Women who had once worked as teachers, officials, or police were singled out, treated as symbols of the old ways the Taliban wanted erased. Then, by 2000, Afghanistan faced another crisis. A severe drought swept across provinces like Badghis, Ghor, and Faryab. Farms failed. Fields went empty. More than 3 million people struggled to find food. For women already pushed out of public life, the drought hit like a second cage locking shut. No income, no freedom to move, no safe way to search for food. Some women slipped out at dawn to buy bread or fetch water. Others tried to earn money quietly, selling bread, sewing, trading small goods with neighbors. But Taliban patrols were everywhere. And during hunger, enforcement often grew harsher. Women were punished for being outside, even if they were trying to feed children. In Kandahar, women were punished after trying to work as tailors from their own houses. Local commanders insisted any work counted as defiance. In Herat, women gathered for secret literacy lessons, hoping knowledge could help them survive. When officers discovered it, punishments were carried out publicly to warn entire neighborhoods. In Kabul, a former female doctor treated a sick child at home because the family couldn't afford travel. She was punished for practicing medicine without permission. Inside the Taliban, disagreements grew. Some leaders saw drought as a reason for stricter discipline. Others feared harshness during hunger could spark rebellion. But hardliners usually won, and punishments increased. More beatings, more fear, more families fleeing toward Pakistan or Iran, villages emptying as people searched for food and safety. Then came 2001, September. The attacks in the United States reshaped world politics overnight. International pressure locked onto the Taliban. Within weeks, military operations began. By mid-October, the Taliban started losing major cities. Herat fell early in November. Kabul fell on November 13, 2001. Kandahar surrendered in December. A system built over 5 years collapsed in a matter of weeks. In the final months, chaos ruled. Records were destroyed as Taliban fighters fled. Many punishments were never documented. But survivors described the same pattern. A rush to punish publicly, one last time, before power slipped away. Women attempting to leave cities were accused of violating rules. Some were beaten in public squares while crowds watched, unsure what the next day would bring. Then, suddenly, the Taliban were gone. Women stepped outside without permission for the first time in years. Girls returned to classrooms. Government offices reopened and hired female workers. By 2002, women were back in hospitals, universities, law offices, and public administration. But Afghanistan's next chapter was never clean. From 2002 to 2020, the country lived between two realities. In major cities, life moved forward. It felt like rebuilding was possible. But in rural districts, fighting never fully stopped. The Taliban returned gradually, especially after 2005, building influence in old strongholds. They set up shadow courts in provinces like Helmand, Uruzgan, Kunduz, Ghazni, and Paktika. Unofficial legal systems that applied strict rules similar to the 1990s. And once again, women suffered first. Incidents surfaced across the 2010s. Women punished for speaking to unrelated men, for accusations tied to marriage, for attempts to escape abusive situations. Each case was a reminder. The old system was still breathing. The world believed the darkest chapter was closed. But for many Afghan women, the past was returning. Slowly, then suddenly. August 15, 2021. Taliban fighters entered Kabul. The government collapsed within hours. President Ashraf Ghani left the country the same day. Streets filled with families rushing toward the airport, trying to escape before the old rules returned. Within days, changes began. Women were told to stay home until further notice. Girls' high schools closed. Women working in TV stations, ministries, banks, universities, humanitarian groups, many were told to stop or wait for new instructions. 2 decades of progress vanished in weeks. At first, the Taliban promised the world it would be different. They claimed public punishments would not return. But people who survived the 1990s knew promises were cheap, and signs of the old system reappeared quickly. Patrols questioned women on the streets. Dress rules tightened. Fear returned to homes like a familiar illness. Punishments restarted quietly at first. In December 2021, in Gore province, women were punished for vague moral crimes, often without real defense or explanation. Families were warned to stay silent. In January 2022, in Kandahar, punishments were carried out inside a large mosque after Friday prayers. People were ordered to watch. In March 2022, in Takhar, a woman was punished after commanders accused her of violating marriage rules. Each incident was a message. The system had returned. Then came an order from the top. The Taliban's supreme leader, Hibatullah Akhundzada, announced that traditional punishments, under their interpretation of Islamic law, would be fully enforced again. Governors across the country received the message, "Restart public punishment," without delay. And after that announcement, cases spread fast. Local commanders tightened enforcement to prove loyalty. Month after month in 2022 brought new incidents. By November, public punishments occurred in multiple provinces: Logar, Kapisa, Parwan, some involving extreme numbers of lashes in front of men, women, and even children. One of the most widely reported events took place on December 7, 2022, in Farah province. A large crowd, more than 1,000 people, gathered in a stadium. The event was announced ahead of time. Attendance was expected. Men and women were brought to the center and punished for different accusations. The process lasted hours, and after that, the message was undeniable. Public fear was back on schedule. By 2023, Afghanistan had become one of the most restrictive places for women in the world. Punishments continued in provinces like Bamyan, Kandahar, Nuristan, and Badghis. Women who once studied engineering, journalism, medicine, agriculture, and law stayed home every day with no clear path forward. Hope didn't disappear all at once. It faded, rule by rule, punishment by punishment, until the future felt like a locked room. And here is what matters most. Taliban punishments are not random. They follow a structure, a machinery. Multiple parts make it work. The promotion of virtue ministry, district commanders, religious judges, local enforcers who patrol streets and marketplaces. When a case is reported, officers take it to a judge chosen within the Taliban system. The accused woman usually has no lawyer, no real defense, no meaningful chance to explain her side. Decisions come quickly. Families remain silent because speaking up can invite punishment too. This structure barely changed from the 1990s to the 2020s. The pattern repeated, again and again. And women were always hit hardest, because the rules aimed at controlling every part of their lives. Where they can go, what they can wear, whether they can study, whether they can work, whether they can exist publicly at all. That is why public punishment became more than violence. It became policy. It became theater. It became a warning sign, painted across the streets, the stadiums, and the memories of a country.